information on our slide here about EAS, and it is Employee Assistance Services, and it is a benefit to you as county employees, to you and your family members, 6 sessions of counseling in a calendar year, and so you want to take advantage of that and our other offers on our website. There's lots of good resources, and don't forget to become a VIP member to get the latest news and newsletter and things that are going on with EAS, Employee Assistance Services. We've been around a long time. Sometimes people forget about what we do, and that we are available to county employees and their families as a service to them, help them in all of their relationships at work and at home. So my name is Mark Cox. I'm one of the clinicians at EAS, and so I'll be presenting today on everyday psychology in the workplace relationships and beyond. So we thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy day to be here and to be a part of this, hopefully, very interesting webinar on these workplace relationships. It's really based in the field of social psychology, I guess you'd say, and the workplace is certainly a social atmosphere. And so I think that there are some psychological effects and things that can help us to understand our own motivations and our own selves in the workplace and in our other relationships, but also I think that we're able to see how it might affect other people as well, and so how it might affect our relationships and interactions with other people. And so that's the hope as we go through some very basic things about these effects that we might call them. And so we'll go into some of the background and some of the research on different things that are brought into the field of psychology. You know, it's kind of interesting. Psychology has a lot of different definitions, and I always think of it as the study of individual differences, how we as individuals are different from one another. And so I think that research goes into a lot of money goes into research, a lot of time and effort, and it is very interesting to read research and to look at different ways that we've come up with some of these principles and some of these things that you may or may not think are valid. You know, there's a lot of research, and we kind of look at it and say, I'm not sure if I'm going to buy into that. So what we'll do today is kind of present 6 of these ideas for your consideration. I'll give you the background of where some of these ideas came from as far as the research and how it was conducted, and then some practical applications of how it may or may not affect our lives as we go forward, okay? So we're going to start, first of all, with the pratfall effect. I think this one is kind of interesting. I think that the first thing that we think about, what does that mean, a pratfall? A pratfall is kind of from the realm of physical comedy. You might think of a pratfall more than anything. As I was looking at this, prat, the word prat is an old word that was used for our backside, and so we have other words that we might use for backside now. But this meant really literally falling on your bottom or on your backside or your prat. And so what happens here with the pratfall effect is that if you see somebody that never makes a mistake, someone that is seen to be perfect in everything that they do, they tend to be a little less likable. But if they commit the occasional mistake, the occasional little fumble, then it's like, okay, they're human too. And so it gives us this idea that, you know, that person is a little more likable then. How did this research come about? Interesting. It was a psychologist who asked participants as they were answering a quiz. They were doing this, and they heard a person answering the quiz that supposedly was spilling his coffee on himself. He did very well in the quiz, but when quizzers were asked to relate their likability to the people they heard, they found out that they liked the person who spilled the coffee on themselves more than they liked the other people. They were perceived to be aloof and unlikable, but this poor fellow that supposedly spilled his coffee was considered to be more pleasant, agreeable, and likable. This has been kind of shown over and over with other research, replication of research, I might add, and so that this effect is kind of a phenomenon. I think from a practical standpoint, and kind of one that is kind of in the spotlight, we just had the NBA Finals, for instance, and LeBron James, of course, is a name that always seems to be perennially in the finals, and he's an excellent basketball player. Several years ago, a college student just out of college was in a game with LeBron in like a pickup game, and LeBron was what is called posterized during the game. So if you know what that means, it means he was dunked on, and this is kind of something that just never happens. Well, LeBron had just signed a large contract with Nike. That posterization of LeBron was videoed. Nike paid a lot of money to buy up that video, so it's very difficult to be seen. And so what that tells us is Nike wanted to keep the image of LeBron as invincible. And it was interesting, I read an article on this in Psychology Today, and they said they wondered if LeBron's popularity might go up because if they had seen that, if they knew that, hey, he's human too, he makes mistakes too, he gets posterized too, and so it makes him a little more human. And we don't know the answer to that, but it is kind of an interesting practical application of that in the public at large. What does it mean for us practically? Well, I think that it creates this idea that there's hope for us that are flawed, that spill our coffee, or that make a mistake. And I think that this is not only is there hope, but there's the idea that we might be a little more acceptable socially as well. Now, I think that is good to remind us that it's okay to be fallible. I think that a lot of times if we think we have to be perfect, that puts a lot of pressure on us. Hey, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Now, one of a few warnings about the pratfall effect is some people will kind of, say, well, I'm just going to make these mistakes on purpose and be incompetent on purpose so that people will, have pity on us or, keep things away from us or not require as much of us. That is manipulation. We don't want to do that. We're going to make plenty of clumsy errors just stumbling through life, and so we don't need to force any on ourselves. It should be that our own competence is established also. So we need to realize that we are competent and that people see us as competent, and if we make these natural mistakes, we just kind of laugh it off, laugh at ourselves, and move forward, trying to rectify the mistake, trying to do good work, trying to be as productive as possible, and not be manipulative. So that's kind of the idea that we're talking about here, is that it's okay, to have this pratfall, not to be humiliated. I think that a lot of times it's kind of funny. Some of as I said, it comes from physical comedy. Some of the greatest comedians are kind of known for their physical comedy. Lucille Ball, for instance, was always getting into some kind of physical. She would fall, and many times did a pratfall, in fact. And and people kind of laughed at her, and it was all of America loved Lucy, right? That was the name of the show. Carol Burnett is kind of the same way. I think you might see Jim Carrey, Steve Martin. These are all kind of physical comedians that use this to their effect, so that we like them, we laugh with them, and we laugh at them, but then laugh with them, and so we have kind of a kinship. We feel a kinship to them in that sense. So that's what pratfall effect is. And so you can say, I don't know if I agree with that, Mark, and that's fine. I'd be glad to take your chats. Anybody that has any chat and wants to chime in about some of this, that would be great, and we'd appreciate that. And hopefully you can see that, we can let ourselves off the hook and just laugh at ourselves when we make those natural, fallible mistakes. Okay, the next one is the Pygmalion effect. And so Pygmalion was the king of Cyrus. So this is in Greek mythology. Pygmalion was the king of Cyrus who sculpted such a beautiful statue that he fell in love with the statue. So the more he worked on it, the more he expected from it, the more he got from it, and he fell in love with it. In Greek mythology, then the statue comes alive, and he loves the statue, and they are happily ever after. We call this the Pygmalion effect because what happened is they did some research in California in 1965, which was the year I graduated. I was in kindergarten, and I wonder if I was one of the other students. I'll tell you about the study in a moment. They went through and they did IQ tests on some of the students, and they said that then randomly, and not looking at the IQ test, randomly they went through and they decided, okay, we're going to tell the teacher that these 5 or 6 students are going to excel. They seem like they will excel greatly in the next year. And so they were called spurters, and they would have this intellectual spurt in this next year. And, of course, that was not the finding of the test at all. It was about the research. And so then the teacher was told this, and so they found that the teacher gave more attention to those students over this year. And so guess what? They did see a high incident of academic growth during that year. So I was obviously one of the other students, if that was the case. That was my point. So the idea here is that if we believe something is true of ourselves or if someone else believes it of us, then eventually it will be. So it's about having confidence. You see the kind of the little wheel here that Mary put in here for us. I appreciate it so much. So we have our actions towards others, the impact of our action on others, it has our belief about us, and then what it causes, and then its actions towards us as they reciprocate those actions. So someone tells us, hey, you're doing a great job. You know, you can really do this. So they're kind of being really encouraging to us, and they're giving us opportunities to succeed as well, and an environment to succeed. And so as I feel that, then I feel that it's reinforced. And so then what happens to me? Then my belief about myself is, hey, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can really take off. And, you know, this person believes in me, they're giving me this opportunity, and I can do this. And so that increases our belief, and then that produces more action. And then this wheel keeps going around. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so the idea is the more encouraging we can be to others. You might say, well, I'm not getting that. Well, give that. Give that to others. Maybe you find somebody to give that to. And so because then by doing that, we're helping this process. And by helping others, we help ourselves. And so this Pygmalion effect not only can be good for us, but good for those around us as well. And so that's kind of the practical application of the Pygmalion effect. So you can challenge yourself with more difficult goals. Also, this is another thing, and then find ways to rise to meet that challenge. And so I think it's important that we see that if we give ourselves, if we just say, well, I'm comfortable where I'm at, I'm not going to challenge myself anymore, then we're not going to excel. We need challenges in our life. So we need to take on more things, just slightly out of our comfort zone, so we don't get discouraged and say, I can never do that, but so we can also see success, and we can feel like, you know, I can do these things, and it's important. And notice that when great things are expected of those around you, you may see improved performance in return. So if you are in a position of leadership or influence over someone, when we expect great things, with encouragement, I think it's one thing. You know, I had lots of coaches when I was a kid, and you know, you'd have the kind of coach that says, "Why don't you just do this?" And well, that didn't help much. But if I had the kind of coach that said, "Here's what I want you to do, and here's how you can do it, and I believe in you, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to do it," then I would excel. And so I think that's what we're really looking for is people that are not only just give us the rah-rah, but also give us the ability, give us the instruction, give us the opportunity to do that as well. And when we're able to do that, then we're able to get a better performance from those around us and ourselves. Okay, so that is our Pygmalion effect. That's how that research came about a long time ago. And the Pygmalion effect, I might mention, is used constantly in education. So we see lots of literature about this in education and about believing in the potential of students. Okay, the next one is the paradox of choice. So, so now this one is very interesting. So this is about second guessing. So the idea here is that if we have a lot of choice, then we tend to second guess ourselves. Where if we don't have a lot of choice, we just make a choice as what's there. Two psychologists years ago set up an experiment in a supermarket with jams and jellies. And so they set, at one time they set up 6 varieties of different jams and jellies. Another time they offered 4 times that. They offered 24 jams and jellies. As a result, then, of that study, 30% of people, when they were exposed to the smaller sample, bought a jam or a jelly. When they were exposed to the larger sample, only 3% bought any jam or jelly. So there was so much choice that it kind of paralyzed them. And so when there's so much stress to weigh out all the extra options. Think about this, if you are going out to buy a car or going to buy a house, the more options you have, you think, well, that's better. I can make a more informed decision. That's true. There's true. It's good to have options. But isn't there a great deal of stress in trying to figure out which one is the best option? And then we always have that idea that no matter how it turns out, maybe I should have chose the other option. And so we kind of get stuck and paralyzed by this paradox of choice, it's called. And so it's very, very critical because that can help, that can hurt us to where we become so rigid and we feel like I can't make any choice at all. So I let opportunities go by. What's the practical application here? Sometimes fewer options, well, that is definitely a personal choice if we do that, and that's certainly something you can have. But I like the picture that Mary put up here, this little guy. Notice he's just happy with his ice cream. And so sometimes we have to focus on what makes us happy and just go for that and just go for what gives meaning to your life. This was by a psychologist named Ed Schwartz. And so what happens is we really have to see, you know, I just got too many choices. What is it that's going to make me happy? How do I get to that position where I can find the same kind of satisfaction as our little friend in the picture here? That just looks really, he looks really comfortable there, doesn't he? Okay, so what's next? The bystander effect. Now this one's very interesting as well. This is where they did a study and was kind of interesting and kind of scary, and it was on tape. They let students listen to, and they thought this person was in the other room, and the idea of a fellow student was choking in the other room. So he was gasping for air in the other room. And so, and he was asking for help. Now, if there was only one person in the room listening to that, then 85% of the time, I thought it was interesting, 85%, not 100%, 85% of the time someone would go through the door and help. If there was only one other person, only 65% of the time would someone go through and help. If there was 4 other people, only 30% of the time would someone go through and help. And so, so now this is interesting, so that individuals here feel like there's less responsibility if someone else is around. Let somebody else do it. You know, so we have this, our character down here, fallen, and then we've got these other 3 guys saying, oh, I've got other things I got to do. And so we kind of push the responsibility off onto someone else. So what do we know? I guess one thing is we know that if we ever need something, stay away from crowds, right? We don't want to get near a crowd. We want to make sure that we are in a particular place where we can get some help. This is another thing. This is why group projects suffer a lot. You know, in school, sometimes in class, I'll require a group project, and I'll get some kind of feedback that somebody's not pulling their weight in the group. And the idea that person is not pulling their weight in the group they will always feel like, well, somebody else will do it. So if somebody else is really motivated, I'll let them do it. I'll let them carry the ball. And so this bystander effect gets in the way of that and helps and creates a problem where people aren't contributing, and there builds resentment in the group when that happens. So what's the practical application? Be specific when you need help. I think that's really important to communicate. You know, when you need help at work or in a relationship or whatever, it's important to clearly communicate, not just assume that somebody's going to help, but say, this is what we need. We need somebody to come get this or somebody to go do that. And so that's important as we go through and work on the bystander effect. And sometimes you have to ask for help specifically by name. You know, so Mark, will you come help me? And so it's important that we are very specific in how we come and request help, and so that's important too. All right, so now the spotlight effect. All right, this is important and interesting. The research is kind of a little controversial here. I hope not to offend anyone. It says a team from Cornell was doing some research, and they were testing, they wanted subjects to wear something embarrassing, and so they are not subjects, they wanted them to observe someone wearing something embarrassing. So they put people in a T-shirt with a picture of, okay, here's the offensive part, apologize, the picture of Barry Manilow. So this was supposed to be the big attraction, this shirt of Barry Manilow's face, and so it was supposed to be the embarrassing shirt. And it's poor Barry Manilow. I kind of like Barry Manilow, so I don't know why he was so embarrassing, but nevertheless, that's what they chose for the embarrassing shirt. So the embarrassing shirt wearing Barry Manilow's face on it, and so they go out in public and they ask people, how many people thought that they saw that they were being stared at because they were wearing Barry Manilow's shirt. And so they made an estimate. And what they found out is then they polled people in that area, very detailed research. They polled people in that area and said, hey, did you see the guy with the Barry Manilow shirt on? And they would say, what guy? And so the estimate of the person wearing the shirt was twice as high as the people that actually saw the shirt. And so we think in terms of when we do something embarrassing, when we fall, like the person in the picture here, then that self-doubt, that negative evaluation, oh, how could I do that? How could I be so foolish as to commit this problem or do this thing? And we think everybody's going to notice, everybody's going to see this, everybody's going to feel that I'm incompetent or whatever the case is. And so, but the idea is that most people don't see that. And so it's called the spotlight effect. We put the spotlight on ourselves. And this is kind of interesting, and there is, I think, significant practical application here. Because what happens is we should be more relaxed, and if we're aware of this, we should be more relaxed and be ourselves. I'll give you a personal example of this. Last month when I went to the bank here in India, they were doing some painting. And I was walking up to the front of the bank, and there was a sign on the pillar right outside the door, and it said, wet paint, don't touch. Well, I got so consumed by the idea of not hitting this wet paint, I didn't want to get my jacket, paint on my jacket or anything, and so I got so consumed by that, now I kid you not, I tripped over the curb and fell straight down, not on my Pratt, I fell straight down and caught myself just before I fell on my face, right in front of the bank door. And I was reading this about the spotlight effect. And so, the first thing I thought of when you fall in public, what's the first thing you think of is get up. I got up, and then I thought, oh, I wonder if anybody's seeing me. And so I thought about the spotlight effect. I said, you know what? Chances are no one did see me. And I went into the bank, and I kind of looked around. I looked around at people, and no one was looking at me staring, hey, there's a guy who just fell. I wonder if he's okay. This old guy just fell in front of the bank. We better check on him. No, nobody did anything. In fact, I just walked in about my business. Now, my wrists hurt, I will say that. But other than that, there was no effect. And I thought, well, maybe there's something to this spotlight effect. And so, you can't completely eliminate embarrassment, but you can, when we commit something that is a faux pas we can realize that we don't have to exaggerate its impact either. I think it's interesting where this comes from, too. It kind of comes from egocentrism, you know, that we use our own experiences to evaluate the world around us. So we think everyone sees things like I see them. So I fell, I'm aware that I fell, everybody must be aware that I fell. But that's not necessarily the truth. I'm wearing the embarrassing shirt, I'm embarrassed by the shirt, or I'm embarrassed by the stain on my shirt, everybody must see it. Well, not necessarily the case. And so we need to be aware of that, because that same idea that if I feel it, everybody feels it, guess what? We don't have our own, they don't have our perception on things. They don't have our view of things, and we don't have theirs either. I think that's where it's very important practically to realize that everyone has their own perspective and their own viewpoint, and we need to respect those views and perspectives. Okay, so now the focusing effect. So now what we focus on, nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it. So there's a real important issue here. When we think about something, we focus on something, and we focus on that almost primarily. The focusing effect, an example of this, we go back to consumerism and think about, okay, I'm thinking about buying a car. So let's say I'm thinking about a specific kind of car, let's say a Honda Fit. And so I'm really considering this Honda Fit. Well, when you go down the road and on the freeway, about every fifth car is what? A Honda Fit. You just happen to notice those cars because you're focusing on that. You're thinking about that. Now, this is what marketers and Madison Avenue, et cetera, this is what they want. They want us to focus on the need for a service or a product. And so if we focus on that, I've got to have it. So if I'm focusing on the Honda Fit, I'm going to go buy a Honda Fit. People are trying to get us to focus on one thing over another. Interesting research here was they did a study of people about how they perceived people living in California versus people living in the Midwest. And they thought, you know, so they asked, how do you think someone living in California might be happy or as happy or not as happy as someone living in the Midwest? And so they predominantly people were, you know, in this survey, where it said, well, people live in California, they've got to be happier. But then when they did further research on people that actually lived in California and the Midwest, they found out that there was really very little difference. What was happening is people were focusing on the good qualities about California, good weather, sunshine, accessibility to services, things like this. They weren't focusing on things in the Midwest where they enjoy much lower crime rates, much lower in the upper Midwest, much lower prevalence of natural disasters, much more safety, things like this. And so they found out that when they really did the research, not just by perception what they focused on, but they really did the research, there's very little difference. And so the idea here is we could get tunnel vision. We can say, well, this one thing makes me think this about everyone or everybody. And so we don't want to focus on one thing. What we want to do is keep a broader perspective and be able to look and many angles and weigh all the angles up before moving forward. This is an important part of how to deal with you know, our relationships, especially at work, especially at home, and keep a better perspective. Okay, so those are our effects that we've talked about today. Those really quickly, if you have any questions or any thoughts on those, I'd be glad to take them in email. You can email me at mrcox@rivco.org. I'll be glad to respond to you. Or you can email our office website there, eas@rivco.org, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you might have or comments. Thank you for participating today. Later on this month, I'll be presenting on anxiety in an EAS webinar, and then next month, Dr. Rutnowski and I will be presenting KEAS. And so until then, there's our information here about how to contact us on this slide. And if if you have any questions or want to make an appointment to see anyone, be sure and call us or text us to make that appointment. Thank you for your participation today. I don't see anything in the chat, and so I'm just going to go ahead and stop a couple of minutes early today. So thank you for being with us today.